He's the former Assistant U.S. Attorney, a prosecutor for the feds, now turned defense attorney. I call him the legal ninja. He's David Katz, everybody. Hi, David Katz.
Hi, great to be with you. I'm coming in at a bit of an angle. I hope it's not disturbing, but
yeah, you just turn to your left as you speak. Your left. There you go. And now you're speaking to us. All right.
Good.
You can just keep looking that way if you want, and that's all right. David, you may have heard my ramp up. You know what's going on. This is utter insanity to me that a judge in Texas has rolled back what is 20 years of safety, what we know is safety using this medication, the abortion medication. Tell me what the legal realities are here.
Well, here's one thing that people should keep in mind. First, these rulings are going to be nationwide. They're going to affect blue states. They're going to affect women here in California. That's one of the things that's so outrageous with the nationwide injunction in this case. The other thing is it's a two-step process. So I'll just call the pill the first step. This first step is followed up by a second step. Apparently, the plaintiffs didn't really get their act together to attack the second step. They'll probably try to do that down the road. It's harder to attack even than the first step. So the worst comes to worst, what doctors are going to prescribe and what pharmacists are going to do with their patients, practitioners are going to do, is to have them take the second step. It's slightly less effective. It's also very safe, but it's slightly less effective than using the two-step process together. And thank you, right to life people who claim they want to help people. It gives women more nausea and more problems as a side effect, but it's effective, not quite as effective, and it's safe. As to the ruling over the main drug itself, there was a decision, I guess you reported that, 2-1 decision by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that does not allow this nationwide injunction that the judge in Texas, in Amarillo, Texas, that they cherry-picked and steered the case to, the Trump appointee. All the big pharmaceutical companies who've been captured and now are screaming their heads off because they realize just how wildly right-wing these Trump appointees are. These big corporations can thank Murkowski and Romney because they knew exactly what they were getting with this judge in Amarillo, Texas. They voted for him anyway. It's their two votes, Murkowski in Alaska and Romney in Utah, that put this person on the court, predictably going to do something like this. Now, what the Fifth Circuit did, Mark, which is remarkable, even though it's considered the most conservative appellate court in the country, has the most by percentage Trump appointees of any circuit in the country. 2-1, they suspended the judge's injunction, which would have otherwise gone into effect tomorrow. That's as long as he would stay it for. So it's not going to go into its full effect. But what's remarkable is that this conservative appellate court monkeyed with the injunction. And so there will be things, unless the U.S. Supreme Court now blocks it, there will be things that go into effect. And the gist of it is that all over the nation, a woman, unless the Supreme Court blocks it, and the Department of Justice has asked for immediate ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court. Can you believe it? Our fate, women's fate, is in the hands of this 6-3 right-wing Trump-packed U.S. Supreme Court. But otherwise, you'll have to go to a doctor. You'll have to get a prescription. And then you'll only be able to use it within the first 7 weeks of pregnancy. Now, a lot of women don't know they're pregnant until 4 or 5 weeks. So they have only 2 to 3 weeks to then run to a doctor, get a prescription, and then take this first step. And supposedly there's not going to be mail order. As I understand this 40-page ruling that just came down, women will not be able to get it by mail order. Again, no telemedicine. They'll have to go see a doctor, get a prescription, and do all that by the 7th week of pregnancy and take the pill. If they do, then it'll be the status quo in all 50 states. But that's a very different status quo than we had before this Trump-picked judge got himself in the middle of this very contentious issue. It's just, to me, even as a legal scholar, not politically, but legally, it just has no precedent. It makes no sense. This was a 23-year ruling that had stood. If a judge can do this in any district in the country, division in the country, after he or she has been cherry-picked by advocates of that cause, we're in trouble on vaccines. We're in trouble on penicillin. This drug is safer 3 times more than penicillin. It's safer than some of the vaccine drugs, which are also very safe. But I mean, this is incredibly safe. What the judge has just said didn't go through enough vetting by the FDA.
So I want you to take a step back because we're getting this in the chat, and I think it's worth reviewing. And here's the perfect, let me put my credibility glasses on and I can read it for you. Vilma says, one judge affecting all states seems unconstitutional and wrong. Explain again, please, David, how this setup in America allows what we're seeing, one judge to shut down an entire drugs availability across America.
Well, that's a great question. Until the 50s or 60s, it was unheard of to issue a nationwide injunction. The most that a district court judge could do would be to issue an injunction that covered that district. So if it was the Northern District of Texas, it would cover the Northern District of Texas. Maybe it would only cover the Amarillo division. But if you think about it, it does make sense to give federal judges that power if they use it circumspectly, which is the last thing that this, advocate, radical right judge did. Let's take 2 situations. Let's assume there really were something poison or toxic in a drug. It shouldn't be distributed nationwide any more than it should be distributed in one district. So if a judge really found that on compelling evidence, it would be proper to enter a nationwide injunction. I'll also take your viewers, listeners, back to the Muslim ban. If a person should be allowed to come into this country regardless of religion, I mean, Trump actually imposed, sounds like 100 years ago, Trump actually imposed a religious test on who could enter the United States, barring people from 7 Muslim majority countries from coming into the United States. When that was found to be unconstitutional, it should be applied everywhere. It shouldn't be that there should be a religious test if you come into San Francisco's airport, but not in LA's airport, and not in Missouri's or Arkansas's airport. It should be a nationwide ban. But it's really been abused in this situation. And I was thinking what would happen if this decision and ones like it actually might be that some pharmaceutical distributors might stop distributing their drug in one district, Mark. Can you imagine? To not give some kooky right-wing judge standing, some anti-vaxxer, activist judge, basically a political propagandist in a black robe, to not let such a federal judge, and there are some of them who were put on there by Trump with 51 votes in the Senate. There are some of them who could really take a crack at these anti-vaxxers. And so it might be that you wouldn't have that drug. And I don't know where else they are, but, maybe the middle district of Arkansas. And so a manufacturer would just say, you know what, let's not distribute it all in that district. Now, what a shame that would be. Can you imagine if people couldn't get these necessary drugs in some district, which pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors had to avoid just so a kooky judge wouldn't run a nationwide injunction? And would it even work, right? Somebody might mail it into that district. Somebody might carry it from another district into that district. This is very kooky. The good news that your people should take away, though, is that the worst part of it has been stayed, and yet parts of it remain that are truly unbelievable, that this is now the law until the Supreme Court changes it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you point to that notion of them essentially shutting down a drug's availability in places where they might run afoul of some radical activist judge, right-wing judge, agenda-driven, of the sort that we've seen in Texas, because that's sort of what has happened with the availability of abortion clinic counseling or even reproductive counseling. I mean, basic counseling. I'm not even talking about the procedure by which a woman makes the decision to get an abortion, but I'm talking about just the conversations around it. Because in some of these states where they are suggesting that there can be prosecutions associated with even counseling, even talking about it with someone in some kind of setting like Planned Parenthood, there could be prosecutions such that now you have a chilling effect in all of these states where that's the case. I mean, I was reading about a couple of cases where essentially they don't even want to risk being prosecuted because the courts really will hand down convictions in some of these cases. So you're right. They'll pull those just so they won't be. That's what happened with Walgreens. Walgreens just didn't want the legal hassle. There's a lot of this now. You probably know people, I do too, people who don't want to go into Walgreens, don't want to do any business with Walgreens because they have essentially signed on to this notion of not making the abortion pill available. But they did it for legal reasons, right, David? They did it mostly because they just didn't want to be in court about it anymore. They didn't want to risk what you're talking about, which is some kind of legal ramification that didn't exist before.
Well, that is, and of course, it's a little bit the people who care about these issues do want to have these philosophical or political boycotts, because if the calculus that the calculation that Walgreens is making is that it's to our political and financial advantage to take one side of the debate, the people on the other side of the debate want them to realize that no, you'll actually suffer more political and financial harm by caving in to the right to lifers, to the anti-women's choice people. I want to say one thing too. One of the problems with our judicial system, there's a judge down in San Diego who gets all of the Second Amendment cases and who keeps striking down these sort of rational efforts that we have in this state to do something about guns. He's a super advocate for the Second Amendment, and because he got one of the first cases, all of the other cases are related to him. Now, one of the dangers with this judge in Amarillo is that all of these later cases, Mark, are going to be related to him, sometimes called low numbering or related case assignment. It's a big, big deal. So Planned Parenthood is being sued for millions of dollars down there, supposedly saying it makes false claims to the government. It makes false claims to Medicaid or Medicare on behalf of women. I guess that's more likely Medicaid. And guess who the cases are going to? They're related cases that are going to this same judge who obviously wants to kill Planned Parenthood. He wrote advocacy pieces when he was a legal advocate for a right to life, a Christian fundamentalist group, if you could even call them that, because I know so many Christians and they don't share those kinds of beliefs at all. This is really a fringe, this is not what even most Republicans believe, which is, of course, another huge problem that Republicans, from the Republicans' point of view, they're about to lose a lot of elections. They got trounced, their candidate in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, mainly over the concern that people have over these radical right-wing abortion rulings, of which this is just a piece. But like you say, it's other things too. It's counseling abortions. It's the idea that they're going to drag someone into court for having a candid conversation with, let's say, a 17-year-old who calls up and says, I'm so freaked out, I don't know what to do. Can you just tell me what my different options are? And if one of her options is an abortion, and they learn about that, and with these chats and everything else, and with three-way phone calls, and then somebody drops a dime on the person who gave the advice that you ought to at least consider an abortion, or here are the advantages and here are the disadvantages, that person could be prosecuted. And if they're prosecuted in the Northern District, they might land in front of this judge because he knows so much about the issue and it's such a related case. And I don't know how exactly you cure that in our judicial system, because obviously in some huge antitrust action, it does make sense that the second antitrust chapter go to the same judge who had the first antitrust chapter. There is a duplication of effort otherwise, but it's getting abused where cases are steered to some philosophically friendly judge, not to some judge who knows the record so well that it's efficient and non-duplicative.
Wow. Yeah. Duplicative is a ding word. A question then, we'll move on. I mean, we're getting a lot in the chat and sort of suggesting what you're suggesting, which is, gosh, the judicial system seems to have a bug in it. I mean, you didn't put it like that, and it's not being put that way, but I mean, just to kind of bottom line it, this is a real problem, David Katz also seems to disproportionately, and then I want a little bit on the Trump and Dominion stuff, but it seems to disproportionately favor the judiciary as defining what life is in America. Has it always been that way, or is this, are we seeing kind of an inflection point?
Well, the judges could do something about it. We have a separation of powers. And so the idea of the legislature or the executive branch telling the judiciary what to do is a huge problem. They do that in other countries. They're trying to change the constitution or the law in Israel so the executive can have undue weight on the judiciary. People get this idea of the separation of powers, but the judiciary can do to the judiciary pretty much what it wants to do, within rulemaking. So they could solve this problem. Trump has just sued, I think, Michael Cohen. Where would he pick but the Southern District of Florida? And is he going to argue, I don't know if this has happened yet, that this loose cannon up the road is the related judge. Now, what a farce. But the Southern District of Florida could have a different system. They could say, you know what, we're going to vet as a court these supposed related case things, not let them be decided largely by the judge. You know, it's decided by the judge who pulls the case and the judge who already has a case. But it makes kind of a conflict between two judges. And if one judge says, yes, I think it's related, and you're the judge who just gets this case out of the blue, right? It's so easy to send it to the judge who says, yes, it's related, but that may be a judge with an agenda. That may be, Trump appointed loose cannon in Florida. That may be this judge. I won't even say his name. One's it hard to pronounce that I don't want to give him the ink. I don't want to give him the publicity because but yes, that's something that the judiciary itself could solve by having a system, let's say, where a 3-judge panel of the judiciary in the district decides if it's a related case or not. Otherwise, you put it on a wheel and it gets selected randomly. I do hope we get to Dominion.
So I just was going to get to that now. So this is pretty big news out of Dominion. The Dominion voting lawsuit, this is the suit that essentially involves Dominion suing Fox News for defamatory and invented stories about how their machines were malfunctioning. And the big news today is that there were entire conversations that should have been submitted. And is that called discovery, David? When they
Yes.
when they ask for evidence, they subpoena certain things, and you hold back some of that evidence in discovery. That's a legal violation. So I wonder if you can bring us up to speed and tell us how this affects the case.
Well, I think it affects the case greatly, and the other shoe may fall with a brief continuance of the trial because Fox has not disclosed things, Mark, that it's required to disclose in discovery. We criminal defense attorneys complain about that in criminal cases. It also happens a lot in civil cases, and the discovery process is a huge part of why legal fees are so high. You know, sometimes there'll be 1 million pages, there'll be more than 1 million pages, and they have to all be turned over. It's especially critical in this case because under actual malice, Dominion has to prove the state of mind, the actual bad state of mind of top executives and the presenters at Fox. And so they have this very high burden of getting all of these internal emails, internal communications, and these are actual tape recordings, which of course, what is better to show someone's state of mind than emails or words out of their own mouth? So to have deprived Dominion of that is an incredibly serious discovery violation. If the lawyers were part of it, this is the Cipollone firm, that represents Trump in Delaware. If it comes back to the Cipollone firm, that's disastrous for the lawyers at the Cipollone firm who are on.
And what we're talking about, David, just to say, these are recordings. You actually hear people speaking like Maria Bartiromo and Rudy Giuliani. You hear these conversations. They are recorded and they were held back. And then now we know about them. I mean, and more to the point, the lawyers for Dominion know about them, and that's what's created this issue.
Well, if you're an ethical lawyer, you turn that stuff over because you have an ethical duty to do it. It might also cross your mind, even if your thoughts go to unethical ways to defend Fox News, is that you might get caught, huh? You just might get caught. And this is one where Fox News didn't think it was going to get caught. But because they now have this controversy with this woman who was the producer for the Bartiromo show, and she now has her own litigation with Fox because she said she was treated unfairly by Fox. She wasn't promoted when she should have been. They violated the civil rights and employment laws as to her. She's got her own lawsuit. She's got her own copy from her phone of this material. So you can look at the two things, Mark, and you can say, hey, they told this judge, they represented to a judge as officers of the court, as members of the bar, that they had turned over all the relevant discovery. And then you have someone who just showed up at a hearing and said, really, they turned over all the relevant discovery? Well, in a different case, we have this recording, and on this recording, we have some terrible thing. They talked to a member of Trump's campaign who said, no, we really don't have the goods. You know, they claim they had it on other issues, but no, we really don't have the goods on Dominion at all. That wasn't turned over, and it's on a tape recording. So Fox top people talked to someone who was a high official with Trump and didn't turn that over, which, of course, if you're trying to show that the top officials at Fox knew that there was nothing to the Dominion allegations, and yet they presented them on the air prominently over and over anyway. What could be a better piece of evidence? And of course, that makes you think that the defense attorneys for Fox knew what a damning piece of evidence, and they held it back just because they knew it would damn their client. That's the exact thing that you cannot do under the law. That's the very thing that's sanctionable and punishable, not just by the client, but by the attorney, if the attorney's connived in it in any way.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, Cipollone could have some exposure here legally. We can talk about that again. But again, this is Giuliani. I'd mentioned in the first hour, just in kind of hinting that we were going to be talking to you, privately admitting to Maria Bartiromo, she's the Fox News personality, that he knew little about Dominion voting systems as far as the company being involved in election fraud. In other words, he was saying he couldn't find anything. And they talked to another Donald Trump campaign official who said, yeah, we can't find any physical issues with Dominion machines. So it goes to what you're talking about. They knew that there was no fact-based reason to continue to pursue this big lie. And it's a $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit from Dominion. But I was going to ask you, you mentioned a penalty. Isn't there now a penalty against Fox News Channel for additional discovery? That is to say, they actually now, I thought I was reading, David, please correct me if I'm wrong, they may have to foot the bill for Dominion's, I'm talking about Dominion's legal team doing additional discovery because they withheld evidence of this sort the first time.
Well, you know, when there's criminality or wrongdoing, we always have this debate, not just in this case, but does the punishment fit the crime? Is it really enough to have what they call general deterrence? Would people hear about it? Would they say, you know what, I'm going to be deterred from engaging in this kind of crime or misconduct because the penalty is so severe? And I believe in this case, the judge has to find a penalty that is so severe that the Foxes of this world, who it looks like think they can get away with anything, know that when it comes to the legal system, no, they can't get away with anything. They have to follow the rules, just like other lawyers and just like other litigants. So that's why I don't think it's fair to start the trial on Monday, because it seems to me that it doesn't really give Dominion a fair chance to absorb this evidence and to exploit it in a way that they're entitled to. So I think a brief continuance ought to be granted. If there's any cost for the continuance, they have to recall prospective jurors again. Of course, Fox should have to foot that bill. Beyond that, there are things that a judge could do. A judge could give an instruction to the jury, like, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there would be more evidence on this issue, except that Fox willfully, intentionally failed to disclose it under my orders and the discovery rules. You can draw from that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, whatever conclusion you like. And there's a level of instruction that almost directs a verdict in favor of one side or the other. In terms of actually granting a verdict for this misconduct, that I think would be a mistake for the judge. That would be appealed by Fox. And remember, something that violates due process or your constitutional rights can be appealed from the state court all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so you worry that after 3 years, Fox News finds a friendly reception 6-3 at the U.S. Supreme Court. So the judge has to be very careful in really lowering the boom on Fox News and maybe its attorneys. But this seems like a proper case for that because this evidence was so damning. Can I add one more thing, Mark?
Please.
You know, when I used to go on shows, especially on CNN, they have you send talking points. So they'll book you, and like a half an hour later, they want your talking points. So they have a pretty good idea what you're going to say. And I imagine that Fox does something like that. But what this presenter did was more than that. She didn't want to have to take notes or apparently do her own computer records. So she had this producer, the one who's filing the lawsuit, actually make a tape recording. So there are tape recordings that were made in due course of, like, Giuliani. What are you going to say? Well, I don't really have that much evidence on Dominion, but and then she, instead of saying, you don't have much evidence, why am I going to put you on the show if you don't have much evidence? Let's talk about something else if you don't have evidence of this. But instead, she was silent and led with it after Giuliani told her, I don't have much evidence. She said to Sidney Powell, you know, we're not airing yet. Tell me, what's the big compelling thing you're going to tell me? And, you know, she was like, I don't know, there's life in outer space. You know, and she was like, okay, well, let's go with it. She didn't go with there's life in outer space or some other claim. She went with the claim that Sidney Powell, right before the interview, told her off air, I don't really have any evidence for.
Trump campaign officials saying there weren't any physical issues with the Dominion voting machines. And one of the conversations, here's what it sounded like. I've got a little bit.
Any of the machines, I know it was on War Room the other day with Steve Bannon. Have any of the machines been looked at? He had said that one was looked at in Georgia.
That's her talking. It's a producer talking to the campaign official from Trump.
I'd have to check on that in terms of Georgia. I know during the audit they did check on those machines. They're really, if we can just go off the record for 1 sec here.
Yeah, of course. I don't want us to say it if it's not. That's why we're checking.
I think they have looked at the machines. When the Secretary of State did its audit, there was a fair bit of looking at the machines. The audit came in pretty darn close to what the machine count was with the receipts. So, I don't know the outcome of those, but our understanding, again, this is from the Secretary of State's office, was that there weren't any physical issues with machines on those inspections.
So there you go. There weren't any physical, and the audit showed that the numbers matched. So it's exactly what you're talking about, Dave. And when a jury hears that, it's so damning, isn't it?
Well, it is so damning, and that's why there's going to be additional depositions. Another issue, they're going to be allowed to depose yet again Rupert Murdoch because he was the executive chairman or executive officer of Fox News, but they took the position that he was not an officer of Fox News. Now they say, well, it was in the disclosure forms that had to be filed with the SEC. Dominion should have done its homework. They should have known. They must have known. It's like, wait, discovery is for you to tell us what was his proper role at Fox News, and you didn't tell us. And the judge says, that would have affected my ruling. I would have had much more of Rupert Murdoch's emails and much more of Rupert Murdoch's, quote, personal communications if I'd have known that they weren't personal, that he was the executive chairman of Fox News. I would have probably ruled they were much more relevant. Well, Dominion ought to get a chance, Mark, to get them, to see what use they can make of them and not have the trial start Monday, because it just seems like asking too much of Dominion to absorb all of that, take a deposition, and also be in jury trial. So I think a proper remedy to help Dominion deal with Fox News's and maybe their lawyers' discovery violations is to give them a little bit more time. I think that makes sense.
So appreciate your time, David. We can get to some of the Trump stuff next week. He's suing Michael Cohen. He's putting off various. He's trying to delay other various legal entanglements that he has. He has a lot on his legal plate, Donald Trump himself. But we can get to some of that in our next conversation.
Mark, if I can add one thing. Mark, if I can add one thing. Apparently, he's in New York City. He was there last Thursday. That was rather memorable. The first former U.S. president ever hailed into criminal court. But he's there again because of the lawsuit over his undervaluing and overvaluing. That's the one that's not criminal, but it's a civil suit demanding millions of dollars. He's there today having his deposition taken. Trump, I don't know if he's going to try to take the fifth in that one. We'll have to see.
Yeah, exactly. And he's wanting to postpone the defamation suit. That's what I was talking about before. And he's also really taken to social media in a big way, even though there were warnings from that judge in the case to which you've referred, where he was first arraigned, warnings from the judge to not do that. He's still been pretty active in social media and what he says in interviews with Tucker Carlson most recently, et cetera. So anyway, more on his legal stuff next time. David, appreciate you so much. David Katz, the great one. Thank you.
Great to be with you, Mark and Tim.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.